In the grand cathedral, sunlight streams through stained glass windows, casting fragmented hues across rows of silent parishioners. The air is thick with reverence, the faint aroma of incense weaving through the solemn hymns, echoing against the towering arches. This was no ordinary Sunday service. An air of tension clung to the room as whispers circulated. The city's most notorious skeptic was seated in the front pew, an uninvited guest at the sacred gathering. James Whittaker, a self-made millionaire and outspoken atheist, sat among the faithful with an air of unshaken confidence. Known for his scorn of religion and public debates dismantling beliefs in the divine, James's attendance at this mass raised eyebrows. Beneath his tailored suit lay a man burdened by an unyielding quest to prove life's meaning rested in humanity alone. To him, faith was an illusion, a comforting lie for the weak. Yet beneath his outward defiance lingered unspoken grief, a wound carved by years of isolation, loss, and the relentless pursuit of control over life's uncertainties. As the priest approached the pulpit, James rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the sanctity of the room. "If God exists," he began, his tone laced with derision, "let him answer one question." The congregation froze, all eyes fixed on the man who dared disrupt their worship. The priest paused, visibly unsettled, yet he gestured for James to speak. James's lips curled into a smirk as he raised a hand toward the heavens. Why does he allow suffering? Why create a world so cruel? Gasps rippled through the pews, mothers shielding their children's ears as tension mounted. Before the priest could respond, a thunderous rumble shook the cathedral, a sound not of the earth, but something otherworldly. All heads turned skyward, hearts gripped with dread. James Whittaker's world was one of luxury and sharp edges. He lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, a glass fortress that reflected his belief in self-reliance. Every detail of his life was meticulously planned, a team of assistants to handle his affairs, a sleek sports car for every day of the week, and a library brimming with works of philosophy and science. Yet despite his material wealth, James was a man isolated by his own intellect. He surrounded himself with those who echoed his worldview, finding solace in debates that reinforced his belief in logic over faith. But the cracks in James's perfect life began to show when he lost his only brother to an unexplained illness. Though he would never admit it, the loss left him questioning the universe's fairness. While he hid his pain behind sharp words and public bravado, those close to him noticed a subtle change. His frequent trips to churches and religious gatherings weren't for debate alone. They were an unspoken quest for answers he couldn't find in books or boardrooms. Father Michael, the parish priest, a man of unwavering faith and quiet strength. He had seen skeptics before, but James Whittaker was unlike any he had encountered. Father Michael believed in meeting doubt with compassion, and he prepared himself for the challenge James posed. Sophia Reyes. A devout believer and choir member, Sophia was known for her kindness and unshakable trust in divine will. She had lost her parents in a tragic accident, but found solace in her faith. Sophia became an unexpected confidant for James, seeing through his facade to the man struggling beneath. Elliot Grayson, James's childhood friend and confidant. Elliot was a professor of theology with a pragmatic approach to faith. Though their beliefs clashed, Elliot remained James' anchor, often serving as the bridge between logic and spirituality. The turning point came during a live debate. James, confident as ever, dismantled the arguments of a prominent theologian. But as the debate concluded, a frail woman in the audience stood up and asked James a simple yet haunting question. If there's no God, how do you explain miracles? She recounted her own experience of surviving a fatal car crash, a survival she credited to divine intervention. James, uncharacteristically at a loss for words, dismissed her story with a curt reply. Yet her question lingered in his mind, haunting him in the days that followed. Unable to shake the encounter, James began to immerse himself in researching miracles, determined to debunk them. This obsession led him to the very cathedral he disrupted, drawn by rumors of a miraculous statue said to heal the sick. James's first reaction was denial. He dismissed the rumors as elaborate hoaxes designed to exploit the gullible, but the more he investigated, the more he encountered stories that defied explanation. From medical recoveries to inexplicable phenomena, James's skepticism began to waver. He decided to attend the Mass where the miracle statue was displayed, not out of faith, but to expose the truth behind the claims. His challenge to God was meant to provoke, to unmask what he believed to be a carefully crafted illusion. As James delved deeper, his interactions with the congregation intensified. Sophia, sensing his internal struggle, approached him with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Their conversations grew heated, James arguing logic, while Sophia spoke of personal experiences that couldn't be quantified. Father Michael, observing from afar, prepared to confront James directly, understanding the impact his skepticism could have on the faithful. Meanwhile, Elliot watched helplessly as James spiraled into obsession, worried his friend was on the brink of a breakdown. James's challenge during the Mass was the culmination of weeks of building tension. As the thunderous rumble filled the cathedral, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. The congregation's collective gasp, the priest's steady gaze, and the palpable shift in the room's atmosphere left James questioning the very foundation of his beliefs. But instead of answers, he was met with silence. A silence that demanded his full attention. The rumble subsided, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. The congregation's eyes bore into James, their expressions a mix of fear, anger, and pity. Father Michael stepped forward, his voice calm yet firm. "James," he said, "you seek answers, but perhaps you're asking the wrong questions." The priest's words unsettled James more than he cared to admit. As the Mass concluded, James found himself alone in the cathedral. The once comforting silence now felt oppressive. His gaze fell on the miraculous statue, its serene expression seeming to challenge him. For the first time, James wondered if his lifelong quest for control had blinded him to truths beyond comprehension. Yet his pride refused to let him admit it. He vowed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost, unaware that his journey would take him to the very edge of his understanding of life and faith. Jared feels the weight of the world on his shoulders as he walks through his massive mansion, his hands clenched into fists. What started as a defiance against the church has grown into an internal battle. For the first time in years, doubt creeps in, gnawing at him. He's spent his life building his empire, relying on logic, reason, and his own intellect. But the challenge to God, the confrontation in the church, feels different. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it's personal. Late at night he lies in bed, staring at the ceiling. The questions swirl. What does faith mean in a world driven by money and power? Why do people cling to a God they can't see? The night is long and sleep eludes him. His thoughts turn to his family, his estranged sister, Ella, and their mother, who always pushed the idea of faith on him. Ella had always been the one to sit in the pews, whispering prayers while Jared mocked her devotion. He remembers the argument they had years ago when Ella insisted there was more to life than money. Now that argument has returned to haunt him. He wonders if it's too late to understand what she believed in, or if he even can. The next day, Jared meets with his lawyer to discuss business matters, but the usual conversation about profits and mergers feels hollow. He can't focus. His mind keeps drifting back to the church, and that moment of defiance. He has built an empire on making bold moves, but this is something entirely different. His challenge to God, to the idea of faith itself, was supposed to prove that he was untouchable, but now he's unsure. As he walks out of his office, Jared sees a news report flashing on his phone. Atheist Millionaire challenges God during Mass, a bold stand or a mistake. The media frenzy has begun. Some view him as a hero, a man questioning the status quo. Others see him as blasphemous, a man in need of redemption. This is the start of a storm he can't control. Jared's life has always been about control. He built his fortune by knowing every angle, every possibility. But this crisis of faith, this internal war, isn't something he can predict. He's a man who prided himself on logic, on seeing the world as it truly is. To him, religion was a crutch for the weak, a way to explain the unexplainable. But something has changed. He can't shake the image of the congregation, their eyes closed, their hands clasped in prayer. Their faith seemed so certain, so unwavering. Where does that certainty come from? Was it just a lie they told themselves to avoid facing the chaos of the world? Or is there something more to it, something Jared has never understood? He begins to visit different churches, watching the faces of the faithful as they pray, trying to understand what makes them believe. He doesn't find the answers he's looking for. In fact, the more he searches, the more disillusioned he becomes. He meets with priests and scholars, asking them questions, probing their beliefs. Some respond with patience, offering their views on faith and the divine. Others look at him with disdain, unwilling to engage with someone who so blatantly challenges their beliefs. Jared's internal conflict grows stronger as the days pass. He tries to push the questions aside, but they only intensify. He's no longer just challenging the idea of God. He's questioning his entire existence, the choices he's made, and whether they were worth it. For the first time, Jared wonders if he's been running from something deeper, something he's tried to ignore for years. In the midst of Jared's personal turmoil, his relationship with his sister, Ella, becomes more strained. Their past has always been fraught with tension. She's the spiritual one, always trying to pull him back into the fold of the faith she believes in. Over the years, their conversations became less frequent, their connection weakened by their differing worldviews. Ella reaches out to Jared after seeing the media coverage of his challenge to God. She's upset, of course, but beneath the anger there's concern. "Why are you doing this, Jared?" she asks when they meet for the first time in months. "This isn't about proving something to them, is it? It's about you. You're hurting inside, and I know it." Her words strike a chord. Jared can't deny the truth in them. He's been hurting for a long time. His life has been built on the pursuit of wealth, but at what cost? He's alienated himself from those who cared about him, pushing them away in favor of his ambition. Now, faced with his own demons, he's left alone with his doubts. Ella tries to convince him to come back to church, to pray with her. She's not forceful, but there's an urgency in her voice. She believes that faith can heal what's broken in him, just as it healed her. Jared resists, stubbornly clinging to the belief that faith is nothing more than a crutch. But as he looks at her calmness, her unwavering belief, he wonders if she's right. Meanwhile, in the business world, Jared's decisions begin to falter. His empire, once unstoppable, is showing signs of strain. A few high-stakes investments have gone wrong, and his public image is tarnished. The world of business he once controlled with ease is becoming unpredictable. His ability to stay one step ahead is no longer a guarantee. He feels the pressure mounting, both from the outside world and from within. He's losing his grip on everything, and the weight of it all pushes him closer to the edge. The turning point comes one evening when Jared attends a mass with his sister. It's a quiet evening, the church nearly empty, the atmosphere serene. But as he sits in the pew, something unexpected happens. The priest, a man who's been kind to Jared in their past conversations, speaks directly to him during his sermon. "The greatest test of faith," the priest says, "is not whether you believe in God, but whether you can believe in yourself when everything else seems lost." Those words hit Jared harder than he expects. It's not just a challenge to his beliefs, it's a challenge to everything he's built. For the first time in years, he's forced to confront his own limitations. He's been so focused on proving his superiority in the world of business, on controlling every outcome, that he's forgotten what it means to truly live. The priest's words resonate deeply with him. He realizes that for all his wealth and power, he has never truly faced his own humanity. That night, Jared has a conversation with Ella that changes everything. "I'm not asking you to believe in God, Jared," she says softly, "but I'm asking you to believe in something greater than yourself. I'm asking you to find peace, even if it means facing your fears." Jared knows she's right. He's been running from himself for so long, and now it's time to stop. He's no longer just fighting against the idea of God, he's fighting against the man he's become. He doesn't know what comes next, but for the first time, he feels a glimmer of hope. The following days are filled with internal chaos. Jared's life is increasingly unstable. His investments continue to tank, and the press is relentless, questioning his every move. His empire is slipping through his fingers, and the media crucifies him for his public challenge to God. He's seen as a symbol of arrogance, a man who thought he could control everything, until he couldn't. Ella continues to reach out, but Jared's pride makes him push her away. He wants to believe that he can solve his problems on his own, but the truth is, he's overwhelmed. The once confident billionaire is now haunted by doubts, both about his business and his own soul. The walls he's built around himself are starting to crumble, and with each passing day he feels more exposed. In the midst of this, a private message arrives from a source Jared doesn't recognize. The message is simple: "You've made a mistake. It's not too late to turn back." Jared dismisses it at first, but the words linger in his mind. Who could have known about his internal struggle? The fear that someone is watching, someone who understands his turmoil, only adds to his anxiety. Jared's defining moment comes when he's alone in his office late at night, staring out over the city. The weight of his choices presses down on him, and for the first time in years, he allows himself to feel vulnerable. The towering buildings that were once symbols of his power now seem like empty shells. The wealth he's accumulated doesn't bring him peace. It only isolates him further. In that moment, he realizes that his battle isn't with God or with religion. His battle is with himself. He spent his life running from the truth, hiding behind logic and control, but now the truth is undeniable. He's lost. He's lost his family, his purpose, and most of all, he's lost himself. Jared stands up from his desk, a sense of clarity washing over him. He may not have all the answers, and he may never fully understand faith or God, but he knows that this struggle has changed him. The man he was is gone. What comes next is uncertain, but he's ready to face it. Jared stood at the edge of his penthouse balcony, overlooking the shimmering lights of the city. His empire, a web of skyscrapers and high-rise offices, stretched out beneath him, a physical manifestation of the control and power he had spent decades accumulating. Yet, in this moment, surrounded by opulence and wealth, he felt an emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. The message he had received from the mysterious stranger echoed in his mind. It's not too late to turn back. Jared hadn't understood it then, and he still didn't fully understand it now, but the words resonated in him in ways he couldn't shake. They weren't about stopping him from being successful. They were a warning about the cost of his success. Every time he had climbed higher in his career, every time he had asserted his dominance over a rival, he had pushed something important aside: his humanity. He had sold his soul to the idea of control. As he gazed at the city lights, Jared was struck by the thought that everything he had built could crumble in an instant. And the thought didn't terrify him. It made him wonder if that's exactly what he needed. What would happen if I let go? The question lingered, but it wasn't just about the business or the money. It was about the relationships he had abandoned, the faith he had disregarded, and the peace he had long ago sacrificed in the name of power. For the first time in years, Jared realized he was exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally and mentally. He had spent a lifetime fighting for control, but now, standing at this precipice, he understood that true strength wasn't about dominating every aspect of life. True strength was about surrendering, letting go of the need to control every outcome, and accepting that peace could only come when he embraced vulnerability. A deep sigh escaped his lips. Jared pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. "I'm stepping away from everything," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I need time to figure things out. Let my business run itself for a while." His lawyer hesitated but didn't argue. "Understood, Jared, but you know this could mean a shift in the entire structure of your empire." Jared didn't need to hear the warning. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't running from his responsibilities. He was making room for something more meaningful. "Let it shift. I'll be fine." Jared's decision to step away from the daily grind of his empire was not easy. The first few weeks felt like a blur. His inbox overflowed with messages from his business associates, and the demands for his attention never stopped. But Jared remained firm. He stopped answering emails immediately. He put off meetings, and most importantly, he spent the time he would have used to strategize on work, reconnecting with people from his past. One of the first calls he made was to his sister, Ella. After years of estrangement, their relationship had only been defined by strained phone calls and the occasional awkward family gathering. But Jared knew he couldn't continue this path of isolation. His business may have flourished, but it was no replacement for family. He needed to apologize, to admit his faults, and to ask for forgiveness. Ella's reaction was cautious, tinged with the same bitterness that had long existed between them, but she agreed to meet. "I'm not doing this for you, Jared. I'm doing this because I still care," she told him over the phone. The next day they sat in a small cafe, their usual tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. But Jared was different now. He wasn't there to dominate the conversation or impose his views on her. He wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to listen. "I know I've hurt you," he began, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "I've been selfish and arrogant. I thought I could make it all on my own, and I shut you out. I was wrong." Ella studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity, but she found none. The old Jared would have argued, would have tried to shift the blame. But not now. This was a different man in front of her. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to make things right." Ella looked at him, her gaze softening. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'm willing to try. I don't expect you to change overnight, but maybe this is a start." Jared felt a weight lift off his chest, though he knew it wasn't the end of the road. The relationship with his sister had been broken for too long, but the beginning of healing had started with a single conversation. For the first time, Jared felt as though he was on the right path, even if he didn't know where it would ultimately lead. As weeks passed, Jared spent more time with Ella, talking about their childhood, their parents, and the dreams they had both once shared. Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to crumble. Jared still felt lost at times, unsure of his place in the world, but at least he was no longer alone in his struggle. He was learning to accept the support of others, a step he had never thought he needed before. But it wasn't just his relationship with Ella that was improving. Jared began to take better care of himself, both physically and mentally. He started therapy, something he had once scoffed at, and began confronting the deep-rooted issues that had fueled his insatiable need for control. He learned that his obsession with power had been born out of fear of being vulnerable, of being seen as weak. But as he faced these fears, he found the courage to relinquish control. Jared also began attending church with Ella. It wasn't that he suddenly became a devout believer, but he was willing to listen. The sermons, the rituals, the sense of community, they provided him with a new perspective, a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. Jared realized that faith wasn't about having all the answers, but about trusting in something greater than himself. It wasn't about certainty, it was about embracing the unknown. Jared's transformation wasn't limited to just his relationship with Ella or his personal journey. It affected all aspects of his life, even his business. As he pulled back from the day-to-day operations, he began to see his company in a new light. He wasn't so concerned with growing it or expanding it. Instead, he focused on making it a place of integrity, a company that prioritized people over profits. He started talking to his employees, not as the boss, but as a fellow human being. He asked about their families, their aspirations, and their concerns. In doing so, Jared realized that he had been so consumed with ambition that he had overlooked the very people who had helped him build his empire. Jared also reconnected with his mother, whose unwavering faith had once driven him away. They had long, difficult conversations about his childhood, about the pain of losing his father, and about the rift that had formed between them over the years. Jared finally understood why his mother had insisted on faith being such an integral part of his upbringing. She wasn't trying to control him. She was trying to give him something she believed would provide him with comfort and strength. Jared's realization didn't mean he accepted every aspect of her belief system, but he began to appreciate it for what it was, a source of hope. As Jared's internal world shifted, so did his external relationships. He learned that true power came from trusting others, from being vulnerable, and from letting people into his life, not as subjects to control, but as equals. Slowly, he built new connections, ones rooted in mutual respect and understanding, not manipulation. He stopped being the lone wolf, and instead, he embraced the idea of community. The final moment of Jared's transformation came at the charity gala he had once seen as a mere business transaction. This time, he wasn't there to network or to secure his position among the elite. He wasn't there to flaunt his wealth or to make deals. He was there to speak from the heart, to share his journey with others, and to show that true success was measured not by how much you accumulated, but by how much you gave. As he stood at the podium, facing a sea of faces, Jared was overwhelmed with the enormity of the moment. He wasn't the man he once was. He had shed that version of himself, driven by ego, ambition, and an insatiable hunger for validation. He had become someone else, someone who could stand before a crowd and speak the truth, even if it made him uncomfortable. "I've spent my life chasing power, chasing success," Jared began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I've realized that none of that matters if you don't have peace. None of it matters if you don't have people in your life who truly care about you." The words weren't rehearsed. They were a raw reflection of everything he had learned. He looked out at the audience, no longer seeking their approval. "I'm not here to tell you that I have all the answers. I don't. But I'm here to tell you that the answers I've been looking for aren't in wealth or success. They're in the connections we make with each other." Jared's heart raced as he finished speaking, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of fulfillment. He wasn't defined by his wealth or his empire anymore. He was defined by his ability to connect, to give, and to trust. It was a powerful realization, and as he stepped down from the podium, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. As the night drew to a close, Jared stood outside the venue, watching the stars twinkle above. He had finally found the peace he had been searching for, not in his success, but in his ability to change, to grow, to forgive. The future was uncertain, but Jared no longer feared it. He was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that he had already taken the most important step. With a newfound sense of peace, Jared closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm ready." The next chapter of his life had just begun. The church had fallen into a quiet hum, the aftershocks of Jared's bold actions reverberating through its halls. He could feel it, eyes following him, whispers building in corners. Some murmured in support, others in scorn. But amidst it all, Jared remained still, his gaze unwavering, his stance unshaken. It was a familiar feeling, being judged, misunderstood. But now it didn't hurt, not like it used to. Jared stood alone in his apartment, looking out at the city below. His phone buzzed in his hand, a message from his mother. She'd reached out, apologizing. The words felt heavy but also light, as though an old weight had finally been lifted. But he didn't rush to reply. He needed time to digest, to let the silence settle. Jared, thinking to himself, "For years, I tried to force myself into something I wasn't, into someone I was never meant to be." He took a deep breath, his fingers tracing the edge of the message. The silence stretched longer. He didn't respond right away. He didn't have to. It wasn't about the words anymore. The pause wasn't uncomfortable. It was freeing. Weeks passed, and Jared spent his days at the foundation. The work was hard, but it felt meaningful, different from anything he'd done before. This was his redemption, his calling. The door opened, and a woman stepped in. She looked hesitant but hopeful. Jared glanced up from his desk, his face calm, welcoming. "Woman," softly. "Are you Jared?" "Jared, I am." There was a moment of silence as their eyes met. He didn't rush her. The air between them felt charged, expectant. "Woman, I lost everything because I dared to question things, but I heard about you, and I need to know if there's hope." Jared didn't answer right away. He let the weight of her words settle. "Jared," quietly, "there's always hope, but only if you're willing to fight for it." The community center was alive with energy. Jared stood before the crowd, his thoughts clearer now. His speech wasn't rehearsed, but it was honest, direct. He looked at the people in front of him, people who had been through what he had, people who understood. "Jared, we all have a story. Not one of us is the same, but we all fight the same fight. The fight to live true to ourselves." The crowd was quiet, hanging on his every word. Jared paused, letting the silence stretch between them. Jared, with quiet strength, "But we can choose. We can choose how this ends. It's not up to anyone else but us." The air hung thick, and then the crowd erupted into applause. But Jared didn't need it. He stood, unmoving, calm in the face of it all. For once, he didn't care what anyone else thought. His smile was small but genuine, and as he looked out at the people who were now part of his new beginning, Jared understood the truth. This was his fight, his victory, his peace.